Um, yes, I guess the recording started. So again, I would like to thank everyone participating in today's event about the topic how to support people. And now I will gladly hand over the word to our guest, Dr. Mecky McNeil.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you. And welcome, everybody. Good evening. Let me just begin by bringing up my slides so that you can check that this is indeed the presentation that you were hoping to be at this evening. How are you all? How are you? It's a question we ask so many times in a day, isn't it? And in fact, we often treat it more of an extended greeting of hello rather than a meaningful question. Because as a matter of fact, no one feels okay all day, every day. How often, though, do we really take the time to check in on our friends, our family, our fellow students, our colleagues, and our peers? The fact is that actually 9 out of 10 of us already know someone who's struggling with their mental health. And this has perhaps never been more relevant as we find ourselves deeply into the second year of the COVID pandemic. Social isolation and remote study and remote working has had a profound effect on mental health globally. In fact, I've got the results from a study that was carried out at ETH during the pandemic, and it showed that during the early stages of the pandemic, students have experienced increased isolation, and there's also been a decline in co-studying networks since the onset of the pandemic. And what's more, the students that were questioned in this study reported increased levels of stress, anxiety, loneliness, and depression. So the fact is that many of us are struggling, and we can all play a part in supporting those people who are finding things hard at the moment. Knowing what to be on the lookout for, knowing how to initiate a mental health conversation with someone that we're worried about, and offering us support can make a huge difference to that person. And over the next hour and a half together, we're going to take a look at this together. Now, my name's Dr. Mecky McNeil, and I may have met some of you before in a recent talk I gave on resilience with my colleague, Dr. Michelle Wright. But alongside my work at Health First, I'm also part of the team at ENSA. And ENSA is one of ProMentor Sana's programs that aims really to strengthen mental health throughout Switzerland. At ENSA, we offer mental health first aid training, and our courses teach people how to identify, to understand, and to help someone who may be experiencing a mental health issue. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my own background is that I'm a medical doctor and a GP. I originally come from the Netherlands, but I did my medical training in London and then worked for many years in a busy family practice just outside of the city. Since moving to Switzerland, my focus is now very much on mental health and well-being, in line with that age-old idiom that prevention is better than cure. I've been with ENSA since the outset, and alongside delivering courses, I'm also involved with writing all the first aid books and courses in English, as well as training our great team of instructors. What I'd like to do to start this session off is watch a short but very impactful film together.
Ich würde sie aus dem Wasser nehmen und dann auf die Seite legen.
Fragen, ob sie reden können, die Person, und wenn nicht und sie so machen, dann würde ich dieses Heimlich-Manöver versuchen.
Ich würde ihn mal auf den Rücken klopfen.
Versuchen auf den Rücken zu klopfen.
Ich schaue, von wo die Blutung kommt, und dann, wenn es eine Arterie ist oder starke Blutung irgendwo, dann würde ich das abbinden.
Erstmal fragen, was passiert ist, und schnell die Hände draufdrücken.
Die Hände zücken und 144 oder irgendwas.
Versuchen mit Stoff oder so das zu stoppen.
Oh, ich versuche.
Das ist schwierig.
Schwierige Frage.
I think you'll agree that many of us feel much, much more able to offer help and support when someone's suffering from a physical illness than when they're struggling with a mental health problem. I think for many of us, it's an automatic response, isn't it? It's almost like a natural reaction that if someone in front of us falls over or gets hurt, we reach out to them and offer our help. We ask them, what can I do? What do you need? Is there somewhere I can call? Many of us are actually even trained as first aiders in physical emergencies. We can actually do CPR. We know what to do in a crisis. Just as we saw in the film just now, many people know what to do in a serious crisis situation. But when it comes to mental illnesses, we don't feel as confident, do we? How confident are you in having a mental health conversation? Well, this inspired Betty Kitchener and Tony Jorn, who were the founders of Mental Health First Aid back in the year 2000 in Australia, to develop a course to train lay people to offer first aid to someone who's experiencing mental distress. And in fact, now their scientifically validated courses are delivered globally, and there are over 4 million trained mental health first aiders across the globe supporting people in need. Here in Switzerland, ENSO holds the license to deliver the courses, and we also have a growing community of first aiders. And our courses give an overview of the most common mental illnesses and how to offer first aid. What I'd like to share with you this evening is just a few of the key messages that we teach on our course. But of course, I can't cover in an hour what we cover in 12 hours to 14 hours in our sessions. But for those of you who'd like to learn more or perhaps attend one of our courses, I'm really excited to let you know that this evening we have a special offer for your community. We've got 10 vouchers available on a first come, first served basis with a 50% discount on our upcoming course in October. Mo is going to pop the link in the chat. So anybody who'd like to join that course, please do register, use that voucher code. It will be great to see you. I'm going to be teaching on this course as well. Great. All right then. So the fact is that we're not just living through a global COVID pandemic at the moment, we're also living through a global mental health pandemic. And I think you'll all agree that the numbers on this slide are staggering. 1 billion people worldwide are currently living with a mental health disorder. 3 million people die every year from the harmful use of alcohol. And then we see this harrowing statistic: 1 person dies every 40 seconds by suicide. In addition, billions of people all over the world are impacted by the COVID pandemic, and of course this is having a further effect on their mental health. We all need to start to become more comfortable about talking about mental health. So what I'd like to do is start this conversation straight away. And I'd like to begin by looking at this picture. What do you notice when you look at this picture? And what do you think it might be saying about mental health and mental illnesses? Perhaps I can invite you to share your thoughts in the chat with everybody. What sort of things are coming up for you when we think about mental health, when we look at this picture? Any ideas, any comments anyone feels comfortable to share in the chat? Brilliant. I'm seeing some great things. Balance, absolutely. Mental health is all about balance, isn't it? And what else do we see when we look at this picture, when we think about balance and when we think about mental health? Anything else coming up for you? Ups and downs, Stella, yeah. Acceptance, I love it. Anything else? One of the things that always strikes me when I look at this picture is the fragility of it. This is a seesaw that looks like it's been repaired many times, but it's still working, it's still there. And it brings up the two things that have just come up in the chat, that there's a need for trust and there's a dependency, isn't it? It takes two people to keep that balance. And exactly as one of you has just said, our mental health is fragile and we can't work on it alone. And in fact, the commentary that comes with this picture, if I can just bring it up, there we go. No, try again. There we are. That mental health is in fact a lifelong balancing act. And I think that's really what we need to bear in mind. It takes constant effort. We see that there's fragility in our mental health. We see the need for balance. We see the importance of support, how important it is that we work together, and that life is a series of ups and downs. But most importantly, I think this sends a message that we are not alone in our suffering. So let's remember that as we go through this session together this evening. Now, before we discuss what mental illness is, I always think it's useful to start with a definition of what we mean by mental health. And mental health is often viewed in a very negative way, but I like to think of it as in a positive way, because the fact is that we all have mental health, just as we have physical health. I'd go as far as to say that there is no health without mental health. Now, the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which a person realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their society. The fact is, as we've just said, that mental health is fluid. It changes over time, and we all fluctuate somewhere between thriving, struggling, and becoming unwell. On this slide here, we see the mental health continuum. And on the x-axis, we've got mental health, so with no mental illness at one end and severe mental illness at the other. And on the y-axis, we've got mental well-being, with maximum well-being at the top and poor well-being at the bottom. So at any one time, we're all existing somewhere on both of these axes, and we're moving around them. Where we are is going to depend on what's going on in our life at any one moment. So somebody might feel very stressed out when they move home, or perhaps when they start at a new university. That doesn't mean they're experiencing a mental illness, but they're having a one-off, reasonable reaction to the situation that they're facing. In essence, what happens is they move from the top right-hand quadrant to the lower one. But once those boxes are unpacked, or they've made new friends on their course, they're more familiar with their new surroundings, the stress resolves, and the person moves back up to the top right-hand quadrant. Now, something becomes a mental illness when the feelings are experienced for a longer duration and at a higher intensity, so they start to impact the person's ability to function in their everyday life. Now, in the same way that we can manage our physical health by making sure we eat healthily, get a good night's sleep and plenty of exercise, we can also reduce the risk of developing a mental illness by developing skills and building resources that really allow us to cope better with those day-to-day stresses. And that's what it means to have good mental well-being. And just as we said in that picture on the last slide, mental health is a lifelong balancing act. It takes constant effort. So what then do we mean by mental illness? Now, a mental illness is a diagnosable illness that affects a person's thinking, their emotional state, and their behavior. It disrupts their ability to study and to work, or to carry out other daily activities, and it also disrupts their ability to engage in satisfying personal relationships. Like all illnesses, mental illnesses can cause suffering, which can last for a long period of time, and they can also cause disability, which can be severe. So what's the scale of the problem? Well, we've already seen those staggering global numbers. Here in Europe, the three most common illnesses are the anxiety disorders, which affects around 14% of the European population in any one year, depression, which affects just under 8%, and alcohol abuse, which affects 3%. And when we add all the numbers up on this slide, we see that more than 25% of the population, in other words, more than 1 in 4 people in Europe, suffer from a mental illness in any one year. But of these 1 in 4 people in Europe affected with mental illness, only 1 in 4 of them get professional help. Why do you think that is? What do you think some of those barriers are to seeking professional help for mental illness? Perhaps again, I can invite you to put some of your suggestions and thoughts in the chat. What is it that prevents people from seeking help when they become unwell mentally? Thank you. The first word that's come in there is stigma. Absolutely. Stigma and pride. Shame. That's such a strong emotion, isn't it? And then also I'm seeing cost and accessibility. And I think that's a particular problem, actually. Accessibility has become much more challenging since the onset of the pandemic. As the number of people struggling with mental illnesses rise, so has the request for support. And even here in Switzerland, people are now experiencing a long waiting list to see an expert or professional. And cost too can be a concern, also particularly in the academic community. We know that health insurance is expensive, and we also know that not all health policies have a full cover when it comes to psychological treatments and psychological support. Another thing that's come up there is a lack of awareness, and I so agree with that too. Many people don't realise that what they're struggling with is in fact a mental illness, and they may not be aware that there's treatment available. They may not know where to go for help. And again, I think that can be something that can be a problem for your community. Perhaps you've got many people within your community who have arrived in Switzerland from another country. They may not know how to access help in Switzerland. They may also struggle with language as well, remembering that that is so important when we're seeking support for mental illness. To be understood is really important. Other things that can lead to barriers of to get help, it can also be culture. We need to remember religion plays a big part there as well. So lots of different reasons that prevent people from getting help. But the key one that's come up, of course, is stigma. And this can be a particular problem for students and also for the academic community. Because for many of us, starting university is a major life change, and actually it can cause a huge burden on someone's mental health. When we think back to the mental health continuum, the stress of this new experience can mean that a student may move to that lower right-hand quadrant. And without support, they may find themselves developing a mental illness and actually move over to the left-hand side of the continuum. Add the fact to this that many people will be telling them that being at university, being a student is supposed to be one of the best times of their life. And they may feel ashamed or they may feel guilty that they're struggling, and they may feel very alone in their experience. And of course, as a result of that, they may find their studies are suffering. They may fall behind on their workload, and a negative cycle can set up as they withdraw and become more socially isolated. And it can absolutely be the case because some courses people are on are so large that other people don't notice that things are not going well. They may not be aware of an individual's suffering and distress. And in that isolation, a situation can become critical. Now, I'm sure you all know that stigma, the word stigma, comes from Greek and literally means branded by fire. And mentally ill people are still often stigmatized, aren't they? They're thought of as being weak or selfish, in some cases even dangerous. And of course, stigma has a big impact for someone who's living with mental illness. Stigma can lead to a reluctance to seek treatment, as we've just said, but that then, of course, can lead to delayed treatment, which, of course, is going to have an impact on the recovery journey for that individual. People who suffer with mental illness often fear and also experience social avoidance and rejection by others. It might be that peers and fellow students feel uncertain or unsure how best to approach a person when they're struggling with their mental health. But for that individual, it's going to mean more isolation, and that's going to make both their suffering and their illness worse. I think what's also a factor is that poor understanding amongst family and friends and colleagues means that they're often unsupportive. Or worse still, they may actually treat the person in a way that makes their illness worse, for example, through rejection or neglect. Sometimes it even leads to harassment and bullying, and all of this is going to lead to a worsening quality of life for the individual, deepening feelings of shame and self-doubt for that person. Stigma is the direct result of lack of knowledge and understanding, and raising awareness of how common mental illnesses are and that they're treatable is so important to change these perceptions. Research has shown that, in fact, stigma is one of the leading risk factors contributing to poor mental health outcomes. So my invitation to you this evening is to think of mental illness in the same way as you think of physical illness, and to value them equally. All right then, everybody, let's move on now. I think it's time for a little quiz. We're in an academic community, so I've got some questions for you that I'd like you to answer with a true or false. Just pop your thoughts in the chat, T or F. And let's begin with the first question of my quiz. The average period of depression lasts around 4 to 6 weeks. What do you think, everyone? Is it true or is it false? Absolutely, lots of falses coming up there. Well done, everybody. The answer is in fact false. The average length of an episode of depression is in fact 6 to 8 months. And a person needs to experience a minimum of 2 weeks of continuous symptoms for a clinical diagnosis. But let's remember, early intervention with depression, as with any illness, is going to mean that recovery will be faster. Well done, everyone. Here's my next question for you then. 20% of people will experience suicidal thoughts during their lifetime. What do you think? True or false? Okay, a little bit more of a spread there. In fact, the answer is true. 1 in 5 of us will actually have suicidal thoughts at some point in our lives. But the vast majority do not act on their suicidal thoughts. They find a way to get through, maybe either through getting treatment or through having supportive relationships. All right, on the same topic, what do you think of this one? In Switzerland, we have on average 3 deaths a day due to suicide. True or false? Someone might be doing the maths, 1 every 40 seconds. Again, a bit of a spread. Sadly, the answer is true. Back in 2018, there were 1,100 suicides in Switzerland, which is in fact 5 times the number of people who died in that year from a road traffic accident. And as we've already said, globally, 1 person dies every 40 seconds. 75% of suicides are in men, and in fact, it's the commonest cause of death in men under 50. Research has shown that being able to speak openly about suicidal thoughts to someone who's supportive and non-judgmental can be a crucial step in preventing suicide. So if you're worried that someone close to you is experiencing suicidal thoughts, the best thing that you can do is ask them directly about it. Anyone who's experiencing suicidal thoughts needs to get urgent professional help. So work together with them to connect them to the support they need. If you're really worried, you can call an ambulance, then the number's 144. And remember, there's a crisis hotline available 24 hours a day here in Switzerland, and that's 147. All of these numbers, I'm sure, are available on the MeWell website. So lots of other resources there for you to look at. Great set of resources. Okay, everyone, last question then. Let's see if it will come up. There we go. Symptoms of anxiety include palpitations, dizziness, nausea, diarrhea, muscular aches, and chest pain. True or false? What do you think? Lots of truths, absolutely. It is true. These are the symptoms of anxiety because in fact, anxiety and fear are part of our normal physiological and psychological reaction to an external threat. As I'm sure you all know, when we perceive a threat, it triggers the release of chemicals in our brains, in our body, in particular adrenaline and cortisol, and these drive the famous fight, flight, and freeze response that allows our body to respond to the perceived threat. Now, anxiety becomes a disorder when the symptoms are out of proportion to the nature of the threat and they start to interfere with our everyday lives. And of course, symptoms are both physical and psychological, and they can be really intense, so much so that the symptoms of a panic attack can actually be indistinguishable from a heart attack, which is really frightening for somebody who's experiencing it and those people around supporting. Brilliant. Well done, everybody. Just to see what we know about mental illnesses. There are so many things that we can be on the lookout for, and that's what I'd really like to move my focus onto now. Just thinking about how we might be better able to spot when someone is struggling. Now, there are lots of different mental illnesses and they can present in lots of different ways, but many of the early warning signs that someone's developing a mental illness can be very similar from illness to illness. And it's really important to be able to notice them in others and perhaps in ourselves. So what I'd like to do now to start off with is to just build a word cloud, just drawing on our collective knowledge of what symptoms we already know of. So Mo, perhaps I can ask you to pop into the chat a link to Mentimeter, just asking you to share what are some of the symptoms you know of already that we can be looking out for when we're worrying about someone's mental health. What might we notice, a suggestion that someone might be struggling? So just give Mo a moment to find the link. Otherwise, I've got it here. Let me see. There it is. Brilliant. Thank you, Mo. So if you click on that link, it should take you straight to the word cloud and put in what you know of, and let's watch this word cloud build together. In fact, if I can, I will try and share it. Here we go, live, and watch it build. So hopefully here you're seeing that. Our stressed out person. What are some of the things that we can notice? I'll just give everyone a few moments to put their answers in the chat, in the link. There we go. Things coming in now. Super. Changes in personality, mood swings, rumination, isn't that right? When our thoughts go round and round and round, this can be such a problem at 3 o'clock in the morning, causing insomnia, which I've seen come up there as well. Weight fluctuations, the use of drugs. Absolutely, many people turn to self-medication with drugs and with alcohol to cope with the unpleasant symptoms that they're experiencing rather than asking for help. And of course, this can lead to further problems, can't it? What else have we got there? Overthinking, loss of focus, real issues around concentration, focus, attention can be impacted, can't it? Unhealthy nutrition, because some people lose weight, but others gain weight, because for some of us, actually, food can be a form of comfort to help cope with the symptoms. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts and for sharing that. And what I'd like to do now to help us with this more, and let's have a look whether or not I can bring back the presentation. There we go. Hopefully that's going to work. There we are. Is it coming? There we go. Brilliant. By playing a short film with you, please let me know if there are any sound problems. This is a really great animation that was made in collaboration with the World Health Organization. Some of you may have seen it before. It was made back in 2015 to mark World Mental Health Day. And the writer and illustrator Matthew Johnston tells us his story of overcoming the black dog of depression. Now, although this film is about depression, many of the symptoms and signs that Matthew Johnston describes are common to a range of illnesses. So let's watch the video together and see if it helps us to draw out some more symptoms and signs.
I had a black dog. His name was Depression. Whenever the black dog made an appearance, I felt empty and life just seemed to slow down. He could surprise me with a visit for no reason or occasion. The black dog made me look and feel older than my years. When the rest of the world seemed to be enjoying life, I could only see it through the black dog. Activities that usually brought me pleasure suddenly ceased to. He liked to ruin my appetite. He chewed up my memory and my ability to concentrate. Doing anything or going anywhere with the black dog required superhuman strength. At social occasions, he'd sniff out what confidence I had and chase it away. My biggest fear was being found out. I worried that people would judge me. Because of the shame and stigma of the black dog, I was constantly worried that I'd be found out. So I invested vast amounts of energy into covering him up. Keeping up an emotional lie is exhausting. Black dog could make me think and say negative things. He could make me irritable and difficult to be around. He would take my love and bury my intimacy. He loved nothing more than to wake me up with highly repetitive and negative thinking. He also liked to remind me how exhausted I was going to be the next day. Having a black dog in your life isn't so much about feeling a bit down, sad or blue. At its worst, it's about being devoid of feeling altogether. As I got older, the black dog got bigger and he started hanging around all the time. I'd chase him off with whatever I thought might send him running. But more often than not, he'd come out on top. Going down became easier than getting up again. So I became rather good at self-medication, which never really helped. Eventually, I felt totally isolated from everything and everyone. The black dog had finally succeeded in hijacking my life. When you lose all joy in life, you can begin to question what the point of it is. Thankfully, this was the time that I sought professional help. This was my first step towards recovery and a major turning point in my life. I learned that it doesn't matter who you are, the black dog affects millions and millions of people. It is an equal opportunity mongrel. I also learned that there was no silver bullet or magic pill. Medication can help some, and others might need a different approach altogether. I also learned that being emotionally genuine and authentic to those who are close to you can be an absolute game changer. Most importantly, I learnt not to be afraid of the black dog, and I taught him a few new tricks of my own. The more tired and stressed you are, the louder he barks, so it's important to learn how to quiet your mind. It's been clinically proven that regular exercise can be as effective for treating mild to moderate depression as antidepressants, so go for a walk or a run and leave the mutt behind. Keep a mood journal. Getting your thoughts on paper can be cathartic and often insightful. Also keep track of the things that you have to be grateful for. The most important thing to remember is that no matter how bad it gets, if you take the right steps, talk to the right people, black dog days can and will pass. I wouldn't say that I'm grateful for the black dog, but he's been an incredible teacher. He forced me to reevaluate and simplify my life. I learnt that rather than running away from my problems, it's better to embrace them. The black dog may always be part of my life, but he'll never be the beast that he was. We have an understanding. I've learned through knowledge, patience, discipline and humour, the worst black dog can be made to heal. If you're in difficulty, never be afraid to ask for help. There is absolutely no shame in doing so. The only shame is missing out on life.
Such a brilliant film, isn't it? Every time I watch this film, I see something new. He describes his symptoms so well and he illustrates them so impactfully. And I also think there's a real story of hope there too, hope for recovery. So thank you very much, Mo, for putting the link in the chat. Anybody who wants to watch that film or share it with anyone else, please do. But let's think a little bit about what we saw in the film to help us to understand some of the things that we can be looking out for if we're worried about someone's mental health. Generally, it's the big or sudden changes that we tend to notice, and some of the gradual changes often go unnoticed. But let's start off by thinking about the symptoms in 4 different categories. We've got physical, emotional, cognitive and behavioral signs. So let's start with some of the physical signs. Would anybody like to pop in the chat? What are some of the physical signs of mental illnesses that we can be on the lookout for or we could notice in someone else? What did you hear in the film? Fatigue, absolutely, tiredness. And it's no wonder that Matthew Johnson was feeling tired. I mean, all those thoughts going around at nighttime, he really couldn't sleep. And another one there I'm seeing, Nicole, thank you, is irritability. I thought that was very poignantly illustrated with the dog biting onto his hand. It's no surprise that he was snapping at his partner. And I think we need to be mindful as well when we're thinking about mental health, how it can impact relationships. And I think that that was very evident as well in the same images when we saw him lying in his bed at night. We also saw the dog lying there between him and his partner, suggesting that there was a loss of intimacy there. And lack of libido is a symptom that's often not talked about, but very struggling for people who suffer with mental health problems. Other symptoms that we see there, we've got loss of appetite, thank you very much. And I think that actually that's something that is pretty clear to me. I'm a dog lover. In fact, I have a lovely dog. But if she were to jump up on my plate and start licking the plate, I don't think I'd want to finish the meal. We can see how that can cause a loss of appetite. And of course, that can also then mean that somebody might lose weight. And we may not notice that as well. Lots of other things that we may notice is that somebody might be feeling very run down as a combination of their poor appetite and their poor sleep. They may have frequent minor illnesses. You may notice that one of your colleagues is off work or off university regularly. They may be complaining of headaches, weight loss or weight gain. You might just notice that they're not taking care of their appearance so much. Now let's think about some of the emotional signs. What are some of the changes in feelings that he described in the film or that you know of when people experience mental health problems? Any thoughts from you? Just a moment to put some things in the chat. One of the pictures that I thought was very, very powerful was when we saw him suspended in the ice cube. That feeling of numbness, being completely empty. And that's such a common complaint of people, particularly with depression. We've already mentioned irritability. And we also saw in the film that lack of enjoyment in things that someone normally enjoys. When the dog was sitting on his kite, he saw the world through the glasses of the black dog. He also described very powerfully a loss of confidence and other things that we might see that have been mentioned in the chat already there are mood swings. So someone becoming angry or perhaps becoming very tearful and crying all the time. The other thing that we may see is changes in cognitive science. So this is changes in the way that a person thinks. And some of the things that were described as well in the film were that he really had a change in his concentration and his memory was affected. Maybe you remember how the dog was digging a hole in his brain. Can you imagine how easy it's going to be, difficult I should say, it's going to be to study, to concentrate, to function at work when that's going on? And other things that we might see then is indecision, hypervigilance, and rumination. Hypervigilance is when someone is very alert, when they're really oversensitive to everything going around them, all their stimuli. And rumination, I'm sure you know what that is, when the thoughts are going round and round and round and round. And then finally, we have the behavioral changes. And these are things that you're perhaps most likely going to notice in someone else. From the film, we saw that he became more isolated, didn't he? We noticed that he was withdrawing socially and beginning to avoid things. And you might notice that a peer or fellow student may stop turning up to lectures, or they may miss assignment deadlines, or they may forget them altogether. Perhaps you notice a change in their behavior. Perhaps they've become more conflictual and more argumentative when normally they were really laid back. Maybe you've noticed that they're working late into the night to try and get their assignments finished, or perhaps they're not even getting out of bed in the morning. Maybe they've stopped socializing. They don't come for a coffee after lectures, or you don't have lunch together anymore. Or perhaps you're noticing the impacts and the effects of self-medicating with caffeine, alcohol, or other drugs. So lots of different symptoms and signs that we can all be on the lookout for in ourselves and in others that may be suggestive that they're struggling with their mental health. And the key thing is that if we notice any of these signs in anyone, is that we reach out to them and ask them how they are and offer them our support. As we saw in the film, recovery from mental illness is possible, and getting professional help was actually a really important turning point for Matthew Johnston. The treatment for mental health issues often involves a combination of treatments. But one of the big things I want to say is that there's been a huge shift towards treating mental illness with psychological therapies. So it's the talking therapies that really are the cornerstone of treating nearly all mental illnesses today. Now, sometimes there's also the need for other treatments as well, and there is a place for medication, although it does tend to be reserved for the more serious cases. So counselling, cognitive behavioural therapy, other talking therapies are really the cornerstone for treating mental illnesses. For you, a good point to offer help and find help is to reach out to to take a look at your website at MeWell for really good resources there. I know that there's resources also from Promenta Sana. There's also resources where you can get help. And if you're not sure where to turn, remember that your family doctor is always a really good place to start. But what's key is that we get help early, because not only does this prevent the worsening symptoms of a mental illness, it also can reduce the chances of developing secondary problems. So an impact on a person's ability to work or study, and also the impact on their relationships. And what's more, it reduces the chance that a person turns to self-medication by using drugs or other alcohol and all the other problems that could come along with that. And so important to remember the importance and benefit of support from family and friends and colleagues as part of the recovery journey. So the key message is that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. And this is where we can all help, because by offering our help and support to someone who's struggling and helping signpost them to professional help, we can help them to get help as early as possible. Okay? All right, everyone, how are you all doing? Everyone doing okay? Shall we watch a little film together? This impactful film was released in October to mark World Mental Health Day last year.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining. How's everybody doing?
Hey, Brian. Good.
Hey guys.
Good. So I wanted to catch everybody up on the virtual event that we worked on last week. The client was extremely happy. It went over really, really well. So
it has to be different for people in relationships or who have kids. For me, working from home by myself feels like solitary confinement. I'm so lonely.
All I think about all day long is putting Mom in a nursing home. I feel so guilty.
I can't take this anymore. Steve lost his job 3 months ago, and my company isn't doing well. We've already dipped into savings. What happens if I lose my job? I'm really worried.
I never imagined homeschooling my kids in virtual classrooms while working from home. I'm so scared I won't be able to balance my job with how much Sophie and Shane need me right now.
The injustice that surrounds my people every day is unbearable. I literally can't breathe.
If
they only knew what a wreck my family life is. Putting on a happy face during video calls all day, then arguing all night, is killing me.
Such an impactful film again. I think this film highlights some of the issues that so many of us are facing, but just don't feel able to talk about. We can keep a brave face on whilst we're on camera, but the suffering can have a huge impact on our mental health. And just being able to speak about our concerns can make such a difference. As humans, we have an innate need to belong to one another, to our friends, our family, our culture, our community. And the power of human connection allows us to feel valued. And it brings with it that sense of belonging, that sense of purpose and meaning that motivates and drives us all to be the best versions of ourselves. But as a result of the pandemic across the world, millions of people are feeling isolated and lonely and are struggling with their mental health as a direct consequence of this. Now, loneliness is an emotion we feel when we're isolated, when we're separated from our people. And it's actually a painful and vital evolutionary response that ensures we return to the safety of our family and our community. The problem is that many of us don't feel able to ask others for help or support when we're feeling lonely or when our mental health is suffering, at that very moment when we really need connection and support the most. And what's more, many people don't feel comfortable or confident to reach out and offer someone help and support when they see that someone is struggling. But the fact is that we feel our greatest sense of belonging when our friends, when our family, our peers and our colleagues check in with us. And studies have shown that simply by reaching out and acknowledging each other on a personal level makes us all feel more valued and more connected. But what matters most is how we connect. We need to connect with authenticity. We need to connect with genuine care. When we ask someone, how are you? Then we should listen to what they have to say and make sure that we give them the time they need to talk. And what's more is we need to check in with everybody regularly, and we need to check in with them again if we're worried about it. Keep the conversation going, keep that connection going. And most importantly, if we are worried that someone is struggling, this is the time that we really need to reach out and offer our help and support. So how can we do it? Well, how can we start a mental health conversation with someone we're worried about? Well, at ENSA, we use the 5 steps of Roger to help us navigate a mental health conversation with someone. I'd like to go through these 5 steps with you now, and then afterwards go through a case study to see how we might put that into practice. So let's start with the first step. That's the R for respond, approach, assess, and assist. And what's key here is to arrange a time to speak with the person you're worried about, but at a time when you're both available to talk, and find a place to have this conversation where you both feel very comfortable to talk, somewhere that's private, somewhere that you won't be overheard. So perhaps you could invite them to go for a walk or maybe go out for a coffee. But we can also absolutely have this conversation on a video call as well. Just make sure to set it up at a time when you both have enough time and keep those cameras on so that you can see the person you're worried about, but importantly, they can see you and see that you genuinely want to help and support them. Fundamental to all conversations, but particularly mental health conversations, is to respect the person's privacy and confidentiality and let them know this so the conversation can be built on trust. It's really important when we're talking with someone not to put pressure on them to talk. Let them know that you're available to talk when they're ready. So if they don't open up in this conversation, that's fine. Just arrange another time to carry on the conversation or make a note to check in with them again. Now, as we approach someone that we're worried about, we need to be on the lookout for crisis. And if there is a crisis, we need to assist right here, right now. And by crisis, what I mean here is about a state of emotional emergency. Okay, so it might be that someone's having a panic attack, or it may be that they're engaging in non-suicidal self-injury or self-harm, or it may be that they're experiencing suicidal thoughts. If we suspect this is happening, we need to offer our support immediately and connect that person to professional help. Okay, let's take a look at the next step of Roger. That's the O for offer a non-judgmental ear and communicate openly. And this is all about creating a safe space for the person to open up and talk about how they're feeling. What's key here is that we listen, that we really give that person our full attention. Let them know that we're hearing what they're saying and that we're not judging them in any way. Now, over to you. What are some good verbal and non-verbal communication skills that you know of that can really show that we're listening to somebody and that and help us to show empathy? Any suggestions in the chat for some good communication skills, both verbal and non-verbal? Brilliant. Eye contact's come up. So important to maintain good eye contact. Thank you. Anything else? Facial expressions. Absolutely, we can use our own facial expressions and we should observe their facial expressions too. It can tell us a lot about how they're feeling. I love this thing here. Avoid asking why. It's so true, because why can be very confrontational. A much better way to ask questions is to use the open questions, the ones that begin with how, what, when, where, and who. And thank you for putting in active listening. This is so important. It's about giving that person our full attention and not being distracted by our own thoughts. I've seen here in the chat, reflect back what you're hearing. Really important. Check in your understanding. Repeat back perhaps in your words or paraphrasing their words to make sure that you've really understood what they've said and that you understand how they're feeling. And thank you for putting this one in the chat. Don't interrupt. So important. Use pauses and silence to really allow the person to speak. Give them the space to speak. It might be that some of the questions that we're asking are very difficult for them to answer. It may be causing an emotional reaction. It may be that they need time to find the right words to answer the question. And if we use pauses and silence in this moment, we can create a safe space for them to do that. It's about asking about what's happened instead of what's wrong with you. Thank you. It's so true. Really, again, being non-judgmental is so important, isn't it? Letting the person know that we're not judging them in any way, that we really care, we want to understand, and we want to offer them our help. Thank you, everyone, for that. And thank you also for the last one there of avoiding medical jargons. That's definitely one I need to be careful of. So thanks for that. So I think we've really been through all of these already. So here are some of the verbal communication skills, and I think also the non-verbal ones are really important. A couple of things just to mention as we start to have more conversations face to face is just be mindful of respecting personal space when we're with somebody. And also it can be helpful to have a conversation in a more side-on position like we see here in this slide, rather than face directly opposite, because also that can feel quite confrontational. I certainly find that one of the better conversations I have are when I'm driving, when we're looking forward. It's a safe space to talk. And that's another reason why having a conversation whilst walking can also be very comfortable. And just to mention, be mindful of touch. Some cultures are very tactile. And when people show care and empathy, they may do that through touch. Just remember to always ask permission first. Brilliant. All right then, let's move on to our next step of Roger, and that's the G. That stands for give support and information. And once a person feels that they've been heard and listened and understood, they're much more likely to ask for help and also accept an offer of help. So we can show our support by showing empathy and care and giving hope to the person that things will get better, no matter how hard they seem in the moment. And we can also offer practical help. Ask them if there's anything they need help with. Are there tasks at the moment that may seem overwhelming? It might be that they need some help with shopping or with cooking. It might be they need some help with cleaning. It may be they need some support at work. But what's essential is always treat the person with respect and dignity and have realistic expectations for them. Another thing that we can do is offer information about mental health problems. Let them know that mental illnesses are real medical conditions and that effective help is available. And of course, that getting help earlier will mean that recovery will be faster. And that brings us nicely to the next letter of Roger, which is the E, standing for encourage appropriate professional help. And generally, people will have a better better outcome if they have professional help. So you could ask the person whether they would consider or have considered speaking to a professional. And we can offer our help here too by giving them resources to help find professionals who can help, and also to help them with making an appointment and help them to get to the appointments as well. And remind the person as well that all medical treatment is confidential. If the person doesn't want help, then perhaps you can explore with them what some of the barriers might be towards this, thinking about what we talked about earlier. See if we could overcome those together. And finally, we have the final R of Roger, which stands for rev up the resources. How can they help themselves? What other help can they use? Remember that people who feel supported are going to recover more quickly, and family and friends play a really important role here. They can support them in their day-to-day needs, they can help them with making appointments, and they can help them on their journey to recovery. So ask the person, is there someone that they're close to who they would feel comfortable to open up to and ask for support from? And then think about perhaps how they can better support themselves. Are they taking good care of themselves? Are they prioritizing their sleep, their diet? Are they eating healthily? Are they getting some exercise? Are there any self-care strategies that they find particularly useful that they're not attending to right now? Could these work again? And then perhaps invite them to learn a little bit more about what's happening to them through sharing websites and reading materials to learn a bit more about mental illnesses. And if the person doesn't want our help, if they don't want a conversation, that's okay too. Try and find out from them what's going on there, if there's anything we can do to help. But don't put pressure on the person to open up. Remember, we can always check in with them again. Our role can be to be available. Just keep checking in, see how they're doing, and let them know you're there if they want to seek help in the future. Okay? And remember, we should always respect a person's right not to seek help unless we fear for their safety or for the safety of others. All right, that's covered our 5 steps of Roger. So we see if we can put it into practice with a case study. I'd like to introduce you to Marc. Marc is your friend and you're concerned about him. He's a fellow university student. You haven't seen him for a while as he's missed the last few tutorials, and at lectures he sits alone. He looks tired and takes less care of his appearance than he used to. You take the opportunity to approach Marc about your concern, and he agrees that he's been feeling down lately, to the point where on weekends he barely gets out of bed. During the school week, he only just manages to get to his classes. However, he's insistent he doesn't want or need any type of professional help. He's never liked talking about his feelings, especially with someone he doesn't really know. He says he just needs to pull himself together and then he'll feel better. Does this sound familiar? I'm sure we all know a Marc, or maybe we've even been Marc. So let's begin by taking a look at some of the worrying features here. And the things that stand out to me are his changing behavior. He's moved away, he's sitting at the back of lectures, he's stopped attending tutorials, he's looking really tired, he says he's not sleeping very well, he's not getting out of bed at the weekends, and you've noticed a change in his appearance. And what you've also noticed is he's withdrawing from his community. He's becoming more isolated. All right, so I think there's enough here to really be worried about Marc and initiate a conversation. So let's think about that first step of Roger. How are we going to respond? I think what we need to do is organise a conversation. So perhaps we could arrange to go for a coffee, or perhaps we could invite Marc to go for a walk. But make sure that whatever time you do arrange to have this meeting is that both of you have enough time for the conversation. And then perhaps you might ask him how he's feeling, remembering not to put pressure on him to talk. And if he doesn't open up on that first meeting, that's absolutely fine. Just arrange another time to check in with him and keep in touch, okay? Keep checking up on him. So how are we going to offer a non-judgmental ear? How are we going to open this conversation? Well, we could ask questions that show that we care and want to understand what's going on. So you could start maybe with something like, you haven't seemed yourself, Marc, recently. Are you feeling okay? And it might be helpful at this point to mention some of those changes that you've noticed that are causing you to be concerned. Thinking perhaps about using the I statements. I'm worried about you, Marc. I've noticed that you weren't at the recent tutorial. You look very tired. I haven't seen you in the library recently. You didn't join for lunch the other day, or you're not joining us for coffee anymore. I've noticed a change in your appearance, okay? But trust your instinct here, because remember, a lot of people are going to answer the question, how are you, with I'm fine, even when they're not. So don't be afraid to ask again, or perhaps probe a little deeper. So you could say something like, it's just I noticed you're really quiet recently, Mark, and that's just not like you. Remember these open questions, they can be super helpful here. The I statements, as I've already said. But what's key is that we listen, that we give Mark our full attention, that we let him know that we're hearing what he's saying and that we're not judging him in any way. And we might ask questions to show that we're listening. So we could say, gosh, this can't be easy for you, Mark. How long have you been feeling this way? And then invite him to elaborate. And remember, our role is not to diagnose what's going on with him. We don't need to be the person to find a solution. Often just by listening and showing care and compassion is all that's needed. Okay, so once Mark has felt heard and understood by us, he's going to be much more open to accepting our help. So we could ask him whether there's anything we can do to help. Is there anything we can do on a practical level that he needs help with? We could also mention to him that many people are struggling at the moment and that he's not alone, so that we normalize the way he's feeling without trivializing it. And perhaps we would then want to ask him whether he would consider reaching out for help. Is there anybody he could talk to? Has he thought about speaking to his GP? And it might be helpful to have some numbers or helplines to hand to share with him. So, for example, the website for MeWell, 147 if there's someone he wanted to talk to, and perhaps the Promentasana websites could be useful there. Lots of resources. And then finally, rev up the resources. Is there anybody else he could speak to? Does he have a close friend at home or family member he'd feel comfortable to open up to? And encourage him to focus on things that can help him to feel better. Is he getting some exercise? Is he eating healthily? And perhaps ask him if he's felt this way before. What helped him in the past? Could this work again? And when you finish the conversation, at the end of it, it's really important that you make a plan to connect with him again, to check in, to follow up on the conversation, okay? Not only will it show Mark that you care, but it will also help you to get a feeling for whether he's getting any better. All right then, everybody, that brings me to the end of Roger and putting it into practice, and pretty much to the end of the presentation. And I really hope that you found it helpful and that perhaps you feel a little bit more confident to approach someone that you're worried about. Now, as I said at the beginning, anyone who wants to learn more or join one of the courses, we do have this special offer. And here on this next slide is the code that you need to join our upcoming course. And I also will be sharing with you, later, the details of how to register the course. But what I'd really like to do now is hand over to you. Are there any questions that anyone has, or any comments, or any thoughts that I can answer or open a discussion?
Thank you so much for this inspiring talk. Right in the beginning, Julia Dürr asked a really interesting question about aren't most mental illness diagnosed with self-assessment surveys? So how can there be a difference between diagnosable illness and self-perceived well-being? She asked about the difference between a diagnosed illness and self-perceived well-being.
Yeah, no, such a good question. And in fact, lots to answer in that. And I think the first thing to understand is really the distinction, the difference between a mental illness and being unwell. And if we think back to the continuum, that can help us a little bit with that. One of the key things is that we know that our mental health fluctuates. We have good days and we have bad days. But it's when our symptoms and signs become so distressing that they start to interfere with our everyday lives. They prevent us from being able to go about our jobs or our study. They get in the way of our relationships in such a way that we find that we're struggling all the time. This is when we shift from becoming just having a change in mood to developing a mental illness. And actually, it's that self-assessment that can be very important in that moment to help seek professional help, because that's when by seeking professional help, that's when a diagnosis can be properly made. And from there, a treatment plan can be established. And I think that's so important as well, is to seek help early, because the earlier we intervene with a mental illness, the quicker the recovery will be. And actually, by seeking help early, often it may be that a person doesn't need to go on to a prolonged treatment, but they can actually make a quick recovery and not proceed down that continuum to the side of severe mental illness by taking action really quickly. I hope that helps a little bit in answering the question. But I think having a self-awareness is really important.
And Esther also had a question about the symptoms. She asked whether can trouble concentration also be forgetfulness?
Absolutely. Forgetfulness is a very common symptom with a wide range of mental illnesses. Particularly, we see it with depression and also with anxiety. And actually, when we think about it, it's to an extent, it's part of the stress response. When we're under an enormous amount of stress, our adrenaline levels are high, it's often because of something that's going on in our lives that's a threat. And when we think about maybe being in a traumatic situation, it may not be helpful to be able to remember every detail of that trauma in technicolor detail. And in fact, it's part of the stress response that we have a degree of forgetfulness. But of course, that's very problematic when what's happening to us is a mental illness in our everyday lives. And poor memory, poor concentration, inability to focus are symptoms that many people experience, and that can absolutely lead to forgetfulness that can be very distressing. The other thing that we often think about with forgetfulness is dementia. And certainly in our older population, many people are very frightened of developing forgetfulness. One thing that I'm keen to highlight is that actually many people are misdiagnosed with dementia. And in fact, what they're suffering with is from depression, which is very treatable and reversible, where dementia is not. So again, another reason to reach out for professional help for someone who's experiencing forgetfulness, because there are treatments available if the underlying diagnosis is a mental health disorder.
And Mila also asks a very interesting question, I think. She asks whether any input on how to give help while not giving too much of yourself.
Yeah. Thank you for a really good question. It is really important that we learn to feel comfortable with silence. Reaching out for help, reaching out to someone who needs help is something that we know how to do in physical situations. We feel very comfortable in those situations when someone, well, more comfortable, should I say. We might feel very uneasy because there might be a medical emergency, but we feel more readily able to reach out and support. When someone's experiencing mental health issues, we don't feel so able. And sometimes we start to do more talking and less listening. Holding an openness there, holding an open silent space can help. Sometimes I think there is a place to share personal stories. It may be that builds a connection, but we always need to remember in this conversation to keep the focus on the individual that we're supporting, and that when we're sharing our own stories, we're not turning the focus onto us. And if we have found ourselves in a conversation with someone, we need to be mindful that it can be very emotionally draining for us. So if you've had a conversation with someone, give yourself some time to recover afterwards as well. Give yourself some space, invest in some self-care. What are the things that you do for yourself? It may be meditation, it may be going for a walk, but give yourself some time after a conversation. And if you feel you are giving too much, then be aware of that and make sure that you find a way to step back from that. It's a good question. Thank you. I hope that was helpful.
And Renita Fernandez asked, how much do the course cost usually without the 50% offer?
380 francs is the full price of the course. And that's for 14 hours of teaching online. So I think it's quite good value. Half price is even better.
And another great question, I think, is how to discuss with a person under the denial of mental illness in terms of seeking professional help, for example.
Yeah, such a good question. So again, I think it's about being patient and not putting pressure on the person. Is really about through having the conversation, through talking, through listening, and through offering our support and through offering resources, we can maybe help that person to discover that there is in fact help available for the way they're feeling. But this can be very, very challenging for us because sometimes it's more evident to the people around an individual how ill they are than it is to that individual themselves. And we need to respect that person's right to not seek help unless we're concerned for their safety. So again, it's important to understand that distinction as well. If you are speaking to someone and you're very worried about them, if you're concerned they may be having suicidal thoughts, please do ask that person directly. And if they express that they are having suicidal thoughts, it's our duty to respond. The best thing that we can do is to work together with that individual to find a solution. But if the individual is refusing, this is one of the few occasions where we can break confidentiality and seek professional help. Again, if you're worried, do yourself reach out for help. You can use the helpline 147 and speak to somebody there about advice as to how to support someone you're worried about. Or you could speak to other healthcare professionals and ask them what do they think you should do in a situation. But patience and offering the person time, letting them know that you're there and remaining available is fundamentally the key step. Thank you. Any other questions? I think one of the key things really is just to have the confidence to reach out to somebody when you notice that something's changed. And often it is very subtle, it's small changes, but if you're noticing that someone's quieter than normal or paying less attention to their appearance, perhaps they're not working in the same way that they used to, maybe you've noticed a change in their eating habits, perhaps you've noticed a change in their alcohol consumption, have the confidence to reach out to them. Know that by doing something, just by speaking to someone, asking how they are, that can sometimes be a really powerful lifeline to someone who's struggling. Remember the importance of human connection. It's we are, as human beings, we need connection. And yet, when we most need help, we fear asking for it. Remember, it's sometimes we can be the person to the people to support someone else in their time of need by just reaching out to them. And be patient with them, let them know that you're there for them, and keep offering that lifeline of support by checking in regularly.
I was wondering if there is anything that we can do wrong if reaching out to someone is a so-called no-go, or
I think the key thing to remember actually is that the doing nothing is the wrong thing to do. If a person doesn't want to talk, they won't talk. So the key thing is not to put pressure, but just to remain available. And I think it's always the right thing to do to reach out to someone and then be guided by their reaction as to how open they are in that moment for a conversation. But as I said, if you're really worried about them, if you have concerns for their safety, then it may be that you need to take action. Thank you. I see that the voucher's not working there in the comment in the chat. I don't know, I can't see that, I'm afraid, but I will check in, and if there is anything wrong with the voucher code, I'll let you know. I hope not.
Yes, and we will also send you the voucher code again in the follow-up mail, so you can also try again, or if we see that there is something not working, we can also write that to you.
And I do look forward to meeting as many as possible of you on this upcoming course. It would be great. We're going to be teaching over 7 sessions over the next month, and very much looking forward to a new class. Every class I teach is for me a wonderful experience and learning experience as well. I learn as much from you as you learn from the course.
Julia asked how to enter the cells.
Is that on the website? Oh, I'm not sure. That I'm not sure about. Technical side is not my strength. If anyone is having any problems registering, another email that I can give you is info@ensa.swiss. I'll pop that in the chat, and they will always be able to help you with any questions around registration. There we go.
So if there is no further question, then I would really like to thank you, Mecky McNeil, for this encouraging and inspiring talk. I really liked the message that there is not so much that we can do wrong, but it's really important to reach out if you feel like someone changed. And if you would like to look into the topic of how to support people even more, we also have a round table next week on Thursday, the 29th of July at 7 p.m. That may interest you. And you all can find more information on that event on our website and or on our social media channels. And we would love to see you at this event in a week. And if you like to help organizing more MeWell events or just be part of our safe community, or if you feel unwell, feel free to contact us. We look forward to hearing from you. And finally, don't forget to fill out the feedback form. You can find the link in the chat. Mo will post, Mo already posted it in the chat. So I wish you a wonderful evening. We are also still here if you have some more questions.